All right. Welcome to the Lit Lounge, everybody. My name is Jodi-Ann. I'm a speaker, I'm a writer. I work at the intersections of race, culture, and health equity. Thank you so much to the Lit Lounge co-creator and sponsor oneKIN. So a bit about oneKIN. oneKIN is a mission-driven retail tech company that works to help small businesses and creators. And so you can find the book that we are talking about today, We Are Haunting, by Tyriek White. You can find that on oneKIN at shoponkin.co and the rest of the books on our curated book list for this year. And so without further ado, I'm so excited to be in conversation with my outer borough brother, Tyriek White, author of We Are a Haunting. Thank you so much, Tyriek, for being here, and welcome to the Lit Lounge.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yes, outer borough solidarity,
Yeah, raised up.
you're really about that. So, but yeah, again, thank you, and oneKIN for having me on this platform. And I'm excited to chop it up, about this thing that we do. Uh,
This thing that we do, the art,
the art,
the
right?
work.
The
And so,
work.
speaking of art, actually, I think, before we get into the book properly, we have to talk about this cover.
Hmm.
Okay. Because first of all, I don't think that someone who would go through the trouble of licensing a Romare Bearden for the cover art,
Yeah.
right? If art was not important to them. And so what are some of your artistic influences, be it literary, visual, musical, or perhaps some other type of creative art?
Um, all of it. A lot. Romare Bearden, for starters, you know, sort of jumped out at me. I took, sort of art history courses when I was in college, um, mainly black art and sort of, you know, theories of representation by Stuart Hall and kind of like thinking about black art throughout the centuries. Um, so Romare Bearden was up there for me. And I think me and my editor at the time, Danny, um, you know, over our shared love of hip hop and jazz and art, kind of seeing this crossroads with Bearden's work, and so it was a process, but I thought it captured kind of the musicality of the book, the kind of fragmented experience of being a New Yorker, of being from the outer boroughs, of being kind of black in these places, also being working class as well. And so, yeah, I think Romare, big fan of Betty Saar, um, of course, Gordon Parks, Alma Thomas, these kind of like, artists during this sort of modern era, uh, in the 1900s that kind of paved the way for, newer artists like Danielle McKinney and you know, plenty of kind of who keep that same sort of spirit. So yeah, and this book, it's heavily, I'm a big hip hop head, also a big R&B head. The playlist that accompanies the book is, largely R&B. I myself, you know, make hip hop, create hip hop. So, I find joy and freedom and, being able to kind of explore a lot of these mediums. And hopefully it comes out in the work, you know.
It is very clear in the work, like just reading it, I'm like, okay. I think that's what made me double check the cover.
Mm,
Because there's such a attention to detail around the creative arts,
right,
um, quote unquote highbrow, quote unquote lowbrow. There's a
right.
whole treatise in there about art in the diaspora and the kind of the depoliticization of black art.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, Tyreek is in this.
I mean, thankfully I've had, amazing teachers and people, who kind of understand, who showed me Adrian Piper, right? Who showed me how that very process of depoliticization of that you talk about in Black art or art in general, American art, um,
Mm-hmm.
you know, down to like our MFA programs, right? How you know uh, they began, in the early parts, I guess, of when MFA programs started. They were like arms of democracy, arms of the CIA, low key. Um, but this was all done to kind of let art just be art, art for art's sake, sort of. And as oppressed peoples, it's a bit hard to kind of mediate that in your head, 'cause it's this thing that comes out of you. It's like, how can it not mean anything, you know,
Mm.
or reflect my reality? So, you know,
What I appreciated so much about your novel, and I want to get into, you sharing a little bit about the book with us, but I don't know, and I'm not as good in fiction as I am with nonfiction. So my encounter fiction uh it is a choice, it is an intention for me.
mm,
And when
mhm,
I started your book, I was like, oh, this book is about sentences.
mm, okay,
Every
yeah,
single sentence to me, I'm underlining, I'm highlighting. They're just so beautiful, so lyrical, so meditative and inviting. And so I see what's kind of happening in the actual context of the story, but I'm feeling kind of my own experience within these themes.
mm,
And so the book itself, I mean, yes, literary arts, it is art, but literally down to the sentence level, the
mm,
way you write, your voice is so artistic. And so thank you for that. It was so beautiful to just like have this as, I don't know, it feels like something that just belongs to me. The
mm.
ways that each sentence felt so inviting, emotionally. So thank you for that.
Thank
Um,
you. That's an incredible. Uh, that's something every writer kind of wants to hear, I think. And yeah, you're right. Like you can tell, like on a sentence level, that's like the most important thing to me. And just piecing this thing together, this tapestry together, but just on this kind of um, this measurement of sentences. And I love that it feels inviting, right? Because especially Kali's part and some of the more um, isolated or grief induced kind of passages, like I'm like, am I am I beating people over the head? And having that kind of or learning restraint almost in the process
mm,
of writing this. Yeah, it's been important. It's been a whole process.
I'm sure. I just didn't feel like this just happened. So thank you for your intentionality in the work. Could you tell us a bit about the book to lay the foundation for folks who haven't read it yet? We'll definitely be reading it after this conversation,
Mm,
before we get into some of the nitty gritty things that I want to talk to you about.
okay. Yeah. Um, I don't get better at this question.
I
Like,
know, I know. It's such an unfair question.
but it's real. It's a real ass question. So I usually describe it as this family saga across time, right? This conversation across time, and it's about this young kid. You know, we meet him at 13. Sorry, my you hear New York in the background.
We love it though.
Yeah.
That's why we're here.
um, yeah, and we see him grow into a teenager and just sort of his experiences in this community, much like mine, this working class neighborhood, East New York. Um, and he loses his mom And in dealing with the grief, he sort of discovers this gift or this curse, depending on who you ask. And he begins to see his mother um, as a ghost, or as this sort of specter, or hears her voice. Um, all of these things that kind of communicate with the senses, and um, then we get some of uh, who his mother was, right, and where this gift kind of comes from, and she's going through her own kind of journey. I don't want to say coming of age journey, but in a sense, um, and essentially you get this kind of back and forth between the two, um, and you get a lot of kind of repetition because she grew up in the 80s and the early 90s, and he's growing up in 2000s, so you get a lot of kind of talk back um, to specific moments. I talk kind of a lot about how a community sort of changes um, over time. I talk a lot about the roots and the basis of this community, um, which kind of began during slavery. Um, and it's I guess it's about how we sort of in kind of seeking something, or seeking a way out of grief, we often have to learn to lean on others and lean on our communities. Um, we can't really do it alone sometimes. I think that's the kind of overall galvanizing kind of thing about the book.
Yeah.
But like you said, it's about art, it's about music, it's about being poor and working class, it's about being black. Um, it's about a lot of things.
Yeah. And I would say legacy too, not just in
Mm-hmm.
this gift of the hauntings or seeing the ghosts, but we can see that artistic legacy between Collie's mother, and himself. So there's this one scene where Collie describes like going to libraries and just kind of picking up a book. And then we see that his mother has this shelf of books. We know Salt Eaters and Sula are on those shelves. But he says that he likes to start reading the book from the middle chapters because the first chapters are always boring, right?
Yeah.
And so you write, and this the sentence that I'm just reading your own words back to you. You say, a book that could catch my attention on a random page was always worth it. And so I'm curious for you, for readers who are watching this, if they did that, if they read like Holly and just kind of started your book on a random page and started reading, what scene do you think you would want it to be and why? Like what page?
Oh, I don't know what page. I know the scene though.
You don't have to give the page number, but you could give the scene.
The scene I would choose, because to me it's the trippiest, and it's really the you know I guess the Volta of the book. Uh, for my poets out there, it would be the scene where Kali and Key kind of meet on this kind of figurative beach, and it's sort of the moment where they kind of discover each other, right,
Mm,
on opposite sides of this arbitrary line between life and death that they
mm,
discover, right? Um, and you kind of get Key is kind of seeing Kali in her future, while Kali is kind of, you know, in this moment also, and it's this very kind of trippy, but also sort of this scene and moment I was that kind of began the story for me, or this story in this carnation for me, because it posed these sort of interesting questions, right? Like, um, the how linear time is, or our experience of time. Um, Also, just, I guess, um, perspective,
Mm,
being, having Key see her son, like, without her, I think does something to her. And she sees him in, kind of stricken with grief, not eating, um, just kind of, vibing, right? Just kind
yeah.
of living, or
Yeah.
half living. Um,
Existing.
right. And I think that informs how she kind of tries to raise him or talk to him. And then we see sort of Kali's, like, seeking out of not only her, but of some way out of this, like, this hopelessness, this
Mm,
this kind of without. And in that discovery, he finds so much more. He finds this love and this passion for, again, legacy, for his ancestors, for the people around him. It
mm,
changes how he, you know, wants to move throughout the world. Do I kind of want to, I see my dad and how he kind of, this grief is just pushing, he pushes everyone away and he isolates himself.
mm,
Or do I go this way? My mom, who's shown me this, and without her even being here, really, but who has shown me this kind of other way of relying on community, relying on love, relying on people. Um, so I would direct them there, because, and then you would open it and you'd be like, what the hell?
yeah.
Like, that's, for me, that's like the best parts of books too, of just like, what the hell is going on, and wanting to kind of investigate that. Um,
Yeah.
so I'd say that scene.
Yeah, I'll share my scene, but what's interesting about your book, I have a very bad habit with fiction. Maybe that's why I struggle with this sometimes, cuz I don't like suspense. So I'll get halfway through, and I'm like, "Oh damn." So then I'll skip to the end and then I'll try to read around to see if I
Mm,
could guess what
mhm.
happens, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
But
I
your book is about sentences, bro. So you were not helping me out at all. Like I was like,
Yeah,
"Damn,
nah.
I really have to sit in this."
Yeah, yeah. It's not gonna fly with this one. But I do the same thing. I do the same thing. So I know what you mean.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you for seeing me.
yeah. But yeah.
My scene, and gosh, I should have not marked the page, but every time I open the book, I always seem to end up getting to that page anyway.
Mm,
But it was the subway scene and just describing
mm,
people on the subway. And there's this note about a Korean woman who's standing up,
mhm.
and you describe her as, threatening sleep, right? Sleep is, and
Right.
I know you've been on the subway where you're standing and just like
Yeah.
sleep. But the line was, she had the balance of a mother.
Mm, mm,
That hit.
yeah.
You know what that looks like. She's
Right.
holding groceries, she's holding all these
Right.
bags, she's
Right.
trying, she wants to sleep and she's still
Mhm,
standing.
mhm,
That to me just like, oh, we're in, she
mm.
had the balance of a mother. That has kept playing in my mind since
Yeah.
I read it.
Right. Because I've seen it. I've seen it with my own mom. I've seen it on the, as you said, you've seen it. So yeah, just tapping into kind of, not just, and this is a craft thing too, but not just, mm, writing a metaphor, writing something for the sake of the image, but also for the kind of emotional value of it. Um,
Mm,
so it's a real thing that, like, people can, you know, kind of see and embody, or have, who has been in that situation. Um,
yeah.
so,
No, I loved it. It hit. It hit so hard. And it made me miss New York.
mm,
You
yeah,
know, just I live in Seattle. It's a very car focused city. And I feel
right.
like I don't get to have those observations of
Mm,
humanity. in that same type of
Right.
way. So it just really brought me back home, and I just thank you for that.
No problem. I don't think I've thought of it like that either. Like the because I'm in the South right now as well, or living in the South, and yeah, it's car driven, and it's so little spaces in which you kind of have that like the beauty of sort of human observation and just you know being able to watch people or just just kind of take stock of like what we do as people, what we do as humans.
Yeah,
Um,
no, that's real. I want to talk about the hauntings a bit. I was curious about, I mean, because we have so many, I can see ghosts, I can see dead people. Like, we have a lot of these stories in our general pop culture.
mm,
And so I was really curious about how you approached the development of the rules of how your
mm.
characters would experience premonitions or their connection with ghosts. What were some of your inspirations or your intentionality in your approach?
Um, well, first, very much kind of the magical realism of you know of Fortress of Solitude and other kind of Latin American literature that deals with
Mm,
um, not only ghosts but these kind of um, hauntings or specter of things that occur, you know, in alignment with history and kind of how these things are used to explain historical moments or to explain the unexplainable. Um, so I started there, and then of course, Toni Morrison and Beloved.
yeah.
Um, so I kind of knew I was working. I wanted to work in that kind of um, sandbox, right, where it's overt, but it's not super um, overpowering, and it's meant to um, represent something rather than like I actually see and encounter ghosts. Um, and while that very much is in there, because
Hmm.
there's a lot of kind of religious practices that kind of touch on that in the book. Um, and while it does embrace that kind of belief, it's more to kind of represent, um, kind of this looming specter of, I guess, history when you're,
Hmm.
or the history of violence when you're a black person living in this country. Um, you're constantly sort of living with this. People have these preconceived notions about you, about where you've come from, about
Mm,
your history, about where you belong. Um, Already, people feel like they're already informed about you before they even meet you, right? Just because
mm,
you're of this color, you're this race. Um, so I think the ghosts kind of represent like what's it like to kind of live in this space, right? There's a lot of there's so much too because there's the idea of social death by
mm,
Orlando Patterson, which is like this idea that slavery was this sort of half life
mm,
existence for uh, Black Americans because of the stripping away of all public life, of access to basic human rights, to voting, to participation in the state. And I extended to not just slavery, but carceral forms of or kind of the carceral experience of of a lot of the people we know, the kind of experience of being poor in this country. It's sort of uh, you don't have access to the same things as a normal middle class citizen would. Um, so I think I extended it to that, and then also just um, the feeling of I went to Ole Miss, and
Mm,
when I was when I first got there, there was the whole statue or these Confederate statue debates and stuff like that, and they ended
yeah,
up um, did they tear it down? I think they modified it or like added like a footnote or something like that, and but again, like that feeling of constantly going into a space and the legacy or the history of this very thing that shaped this country but traumatized your people. um it surrounds you. It's everywhere. It's inescapable in the very kind of landscape, in the very kind of mapping of this place. Down to I tell this story a lot, just wondering the street names, the street signs in my neighborhood, like who are these people, and to
yeah,
find out like most of them are were slaveholders, you know. So
yeah,
um just that kind of psychic, I don't want to call it torment, but it weighs on a person's kind of mental, emotional,
mm,
spiritual state. And so what's the right, or what's something that can kind of explain that or explore that, or provide a platform to kind of question this. And hauntings, it works, it's suitable.
yeah. No, I think just listening to I'm like right up in here listening because that is I'm so tapped in. Like that is so real because a lot of these things are so immaterial and it's
Mm.
hard to give language to your own experiences with these types of invisible forces. And
Right.
so just listening to you speak, I see the kind of fluidity um in who is the we and who are the hauntings, just in the different applications of
Mm.
these ideas, that even a street sign could be an entry point to a whole history. Looking at the types of flowers that grow in this area, or the fact that a big chunk of the rockaways can get underwater. Like even
Mm.
thinking about the land is itself another type of haunting.
Mm.
And it's just kind of connecting with me now of there in a lot of of these magical realism stories, or if, when you're dealing with ghosts in pop culture, there's always this trope of people don't believe you, or people are scared of you. There's a disbelief. But what I found in reading your text is that they're generally surrounded by people who accept the realities of um this in between, or this the juncture of life and death, that there will be people who can access that. There are people
Mhm.
who can hear voices or see things or have premonitions. And there's of course there's confusion, maybe there's some struggle, but I didn't really find people in the book that were like, you're crazy, there's no way that that's real.
Right. Right. And I think that makes it kind of palatable to someone who is interested in like reading like these ultra realistic things. I think a review used the term hyper real, which I thought
Mm,
was kind of cool.
that's
But
dope.
right, right. But yeah, just it kind of it makes it all right. It makes it this kind of normal thing, which I don't know if you've been in certain spaces where people believe or have like I know plenty of people who have premonitions, or
Yeah,
people
my
who
grandmother, my
right,
mom. Yeah.
right. So for us, um while a lot of it is to explain certain historical processes, a lot of it shit like it's there, and it's there for a reason, you know.
Mm.
um yeah.
I want to get into the topic of grief. There were so
Mhm.
many passages throughout the book where I literally underlined and wrote the word grief, 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 like three. I literally just opened the book and found one. Like it literally says just grief, grief, grief is all that says on this side.
Damn.
um, can I read a few sentences now that I just have it open?
Yeah, of course.
It's completely out of context, but I'm just gonna read it. I'm gonna give a dramatic reading.
You got it.
Okay. Page 72 for people who want to know what I'm talking about. So Tyreek writes, I wanted to bring up big fat tears and lie in them days at a time. I wanted to sit with the photos I had left of my mother. Everything got lost in the fire. I wanted to be about 8 or 9 and run around, sink into her soft belly. Where was the pastor now? The papers, the news trucks, the politicians. Now that I can't pay rent or beg for furniture to fill this place, it was like mommy died and she suddenly belonged to everyone, but all the bullshit after was mine alone. I'm the only one who carries it everywhere I go. There are passages upon passages upon passages that like takes you into grief, like deep in it. And I'm curious, like, what did you learn or relearn about grief and kind of translating the depths and the multitudes of that experience onto the page?
Mm. Damn, that's a great question. um well, I think even just starting with that passage you read, um you know I guess a lot of these things, a lot of these experiences, are real, are or informed by real events. So I've been in proximity to, close to, friends with, family with, these you know acts of violence, acts of state violence, acts of political violence, acts of senseless violence, that get publicized, that get the news article because
Mm,
it's so atrocious, that gets the pastor out, that gets, all of these things. And then I've been with the family
mm,
when all of that is done. And you just have to live in that, and you just have to sit in that, and you have to move because, NYCHA has to put you in entirely different housing development because it's too dangerous now. Um,
mm,
so I think it's really just, you know being in these circles, being with family, being with your own family, or being empathetic, but also like realizing every kind of component or dimension to how we experience grief, from the anger of everyone, of feeling everyone not supporting you or whatever, to
mm,
kind of having to, um, make sense of things, to having to, hearing a sound and then saying, oh, that's so and so, they're speaking to us from kind of beyond, and all that. But I've seen kind of all of these stages of grief, um, in others and in my own life, that it was hard for me to kind of write this book because this for me this book is also a celebration, right, of all of these things of this place, these people from this place of art. um so to have at the center of it be kind of this idea of grief, or this concept of grief and how we deal with it. I think Kali goes on that journey. He goes on, you know, what what grief um, does to kind of his family. And I think
Mhm.
that's sometimes where we see. I think that's what I learned of seeing how grief plays out on particular moments, right? So there's the political nature of it, of seeing politicians and pastors, you know, uh, take pictures for photo ops, but then leave this family still in the project, still poor, whatever. And I've also seen, when you when a matriarch of a
Mm,
family passes, right? What can fill that space? What fills that position? Or the organizing of dinners, the organizing of reunions, the reaching out, the caring, the connecting the dots, all of these things, and the people around them have to scramble to kind of fill these things in. um that's why you know you see Toya, his colleague's sister, so
yeah,
upset with him because he's not doing his part.
yeah,
He's not filling the space. She's emotionally, she's giving more than he is. He gets to just kind of detach and like be in his little ball. But that's, again, seeing kind of the wounds it leaves in the people around, the person who is gone. I think that's what I kind of locked in on, and I wanted to explore that. Um,
yeah.
if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense because it's calling to mind a sentence that I believe the grandmother said about Kali and Toya's father, where she said that men have the privilege of absence. The amount of women that I sent that to that is dealing with, separations and divorces right now. But I think what that also speaks to is, and you write about this so beautifully as well, is that Toya's efforts makes her grief invisible,
Mm,
and we can feel, even in Kali's detachment, we can feel his grief process because it more closely aligns with how we understand the kind of actions of grief.
mhm,
um and and we can see, um Kali's father is very absent, and I mean he's there but he's not there, right?
right.
We can see that approach to loss and grief as a haunting that lives within Kali, and how he responds to the loss of his mother
Mm,
and the other types of different levels of griefs beyond that interpersonal grief, and how he deals with it.
right.
So I feel like when people read the book and the more you get to talk about it, you start, you spoke about this in the beginning about the fragments of the book, which means that you can rearrange and piece them back together, to create new meaning for yourself and kind of what you want to get out of it.
Right.
There's a part later in the book, I couldn't find the quote, and probably because I didn't want to deal with the realization of this, but there was this section that you
Or
talked about the relationship between grief and love, because
mm,
I kept talking to myself like, yeah, grief is love, and grief is a type of love, and then you wrote grief is not love, and I'm like, I don't want to hear that. We could talk about that, but I do want to talk about the love part.
Okay.
Unless you want to say something about that.
Uh, Listen, however you feel, I think however you feel about it is probably the correct way to go. I have my own thoughts, obviously, but
No, I want to know what the thoughts are. Because that's just my own resistance, which I
I
have
mean,
to.
just immediately off the bat, it's like, you know, um, just because you grieve someone or something doesn't mean you necessarily love that thing, right? I mean,
You're right.
like
Keep
you
going.
are you you are saddened by the loss of this thing. Um, and it hurts to lose something. And you can love the thing that you lost, but that doesn't mean that the thing that you lost is the thing that you love, if that makes sense. Um, Hold on, let me get my charger.
You're blowing my mind right now, though. Like as settle your charger situation, because
Okay, we good.
I'm thinking about all the things that I am grieving beyond people, right?
Right, right, right.
And maybe I could make an argument
Mm,
for it, right? And so
mm,
when I'm dealing with, you know, structural violence, for example, that pain, that grief is connected to a love of self or a love of
mm,
community
mm,
that doesn't get to be fully realized because of that type of violence.
mm.
But
Yeah.
the actual substance, the trigger for the grief isn't necessary. I don't love racism, right?
Right,
Like fuck racism, real talk.
right,
Like fuck like, you
right.
know, um the violence of the healthcare system. But
Hmm.
I'm grieving the parts of myself that are lost or the people that I lose in the wake of that type of structural violence or
Right.
loss that in that way.
Wow. Yeah. No, I no, I get that. I get that. Um, that's powerful. I so all right. So what do you think about like something like this? Like I this might actually be in the book, but and this is the issue with writing about parts of your life because you're like, did I put that in the book?
Hmm. I know
Um,
what you mean.
but I used to ask my mom like, oh, why did God do this? Like, why did God like, let slavery happen and all this stuff and and that like usually develops into like anger and resentment and shame, guilt that a lot of us go through. Um, but also it can turn into a deep love and respect and honor for our ancestors and our culture that we came out of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we did that shit. We we rebelled and we grew from it. We did all these things, and now you know we're free. I guess. I guess. But so, what do you think of something like that, where I I love black people so much. I love my
Mm-hmm.
culture so much. I love what we've been able to do so much and what we've come from and that resilience, the amount of resilience we show. Um, I adore it, but I hate the past. I hate that
Mm-hmm.
history. I hate that past. And I hate that we have to be resilient, that I mean, of course, like, and this is where like this kind of global, um, sort of, uh, global oppression or the ways in which like our oppression intersects with so many other cultures and identities and all of that. But sometimes it seems like we're the only people who, have to be resilient.
Mm-hmm.
We have to turn the other cheek. Sort of what they're telling the Palestinians now and other
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
groups who are being, genocided and neglected and all of these things. But I don't know. It's not really a question. It's just how
No,
do you
I'm
sit
so into this because I think
for this? Yeah.
the the seeds of this are what you put in the book, right? Like
Right.
this meeting place of life and death,
Hmm.
right? There are characters who talk about, oh, you could see what happened in the past. Why wouldn't you be able to see into the future?
Yeah.
What is time,
Hmm.
right? And so there's another part where I wrote, you're kind of talking about a void. And I've been kind of like teetering with this idea of void, which is so interesting to me because a void, both in like our understanding of the concept and the way that it gets represented in pop culture,
Hmm.
a void is simultaneously an absence
Right.
of anything, but a void is also where everything is.
Mm. Yeah.
I don't know if you ever
Yeah.
watched like The Good Place. And so when the Darcy character, like the AI character, goes into the void,
Hmm.
that means that she can call anything into that space. It's a void. Everything is here.
Mm.
And so when I think about, Ta-Nehisi Coates had talked about this where he's like, I love being black and I hate racism.
Right.
When I talk to my friends who are parents, and this I learned through my own health issues and hospitalization, where, every time I hear parents talk about how much they want their kids to be resilient, they also talk about how much they want to protect their children. And I'm like, resilience is not something that you get. It is the
Mm.
outcome of something that you were not protected from.
Wow.
And so they
Yeah.
coexist, you
Hmm.
know? And so I think about that relationship. And this is just all
Yeah.
from reading your work, right? Like the relationship between grief and love, that they're not the same thing, but
Hmm.
they co occur,
Right.
right?
Right.
They constitute each other in some
Yeah.
type of way.
Hmm.
Where
It's
grief,
like,
yeah, go
sorry.
ahead. No, go ahead,
No,
go
I
ahead.
was just. It reminds me of like black holes, or like, you know, which again is like nothingness, right? But it's everything. It pulls in literal time and space, right? So it kind of reminds me of like, there's this incredible quote. I'm gonna see if I can find it right quick, but yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Yeah. You can look for the quote. I'll talk about something else.
Yeah, yeah.
So to the point of love, and I think this actually, okay, this is a perfect segue because um I used to take the dollar vans back in the day, right?
Oh yeah.
And so I mean ain't no dollar no more. I,
No, no.
I,
It's the saddest thing ever.
I know, but like even when I was taking, I was like, oh, the dollar van is $1.25 now. It's a quarter dollar van. Like, what we doing, right?
Come on.
But that kind of informal, formal transportation systems, that is a diasporic practice. You can go to any black and brown country in the world or any country, and there's a informal transportation network that is
Hmm.
kind of like you just know where to stand to catch the dollar van. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like somebody got to teach you how to take the dollar van. And so the fact that the dollar vans exist and you get on the dollar van is nurses, it's just like working class people who trying to, get to the train station, get to Jamaica Ave
Right.
on time and for cheaper. But that network exists in a direct conversation with the MTA system, right?
Hmm.
Informally. And I know there might be something different now, but you know, the dollar van can't the dollar van for me is an expression of love for community and the ways that community protects each other.
Yeah.
I think in the book we see this with Miss Betty giving Collie stew, or like
Right.
strangers helping each other, people feeding each other. That
Right.
type of network exists in community oftentimes because that types of support doesn't exist structurally within the larger culture. And
Hmm.
so there's a grief in the absence of that type of support, in addition to the love of
Mm.
like mutual aid, right? And
Right,
like
right.
community networks.
Yeah, yeah. No, I wanted to. I was getting a mutual aid. Like when you said it like that, dollar vans definitely are a mutual aid in some degree. If the price didn't rise, but if it was,
Yeah.
when it was $1, it was certainly like, you know, um, like how the Panthers used to police their neighborhood, or give out free breakfast and free sickle cell um, treatment and advice. Um, the same way that mutual aid societies began, largely in Black cultures and communities. It's why you get susus. I don't know if you
Mm-hmm.
ever, yes, like, people pool their money,
Mm-hmm.
just all friend based, community based, just pool their money, and like each month or however you do it, somebody gets that money.
Yeah.
Just all of these practices, um, in which a community can show love and care for one another. And I think that was one of the, you know I'm continuing this idea moving forward, but like in We Are a Haunting, for sure, I wanted to kind of show kind of this infrastructure of relationships. um you see when, housing, um they're in debt,
Mm.
in real life and in the book, but in the book, they're in debt, so they can't send, people to take out the trash, or people to do, you know just regular repairs. It's so backed up, or requests are so backed up, so you have people in the neighborhood, um, doing that work or filling in for that work,
Mm.
um, which again reflects like my own kind of relationship, uh, with folk in my community. I
Mm.
knew, that's why, like, like, when people we when people talk about like black on black crime, and like, oh, why don't y'all ever march for like black on black crime and stuff like that? I'm like, what are you talking about? We march all the time. We do
Stay
actual
in the streets.
programming,
Yeah.
right? Like we do actual things to not to, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Um, the like women who, or just folk who parented me, folk who, like, I was in their house, because I'm friends with they homie, with their
Mm-hmm.
kids and stuff like that. But just, you know, and then seeing these folk go out and have a fish fry for, the whole block or something like that. Like that,
Mm-hmm.
to me, is infrastructure, is, you know, how a community, like, it isn't this kind of isolated wild west that I guess people imagine, like, growing up in the projects is is so, um connected, so built on kind of, you know what you do for me, I can do for you, or if I can't do anything for me, shit, at least I could maybe do something for you.
Yeah.
I'm used to seeing that, so
Yeah.
I wanted to definitely show that in the book, and I found the quote.
Let's hear it.
So it's by Bea Richards, but she says, "What is black that it should be redefined? It is the form of all forms, the womb of infinity, out of which all things come and all things will return." So that's kind of what you were saying.
Yeah, that's what we're
Um,
talking about.
mhm.
I'm gonna have to look that up.
Yeah,
That's
Bea Richards.
I'm gonna write that in the book so I
Yeah,
can keep that in conversation.
for sure.
Um, actually, to the point of quotations, and this, when I knew it, I'm like, look at the universe yelling at me again. Because I have soul eaters. I think if you looked at my copy of the book, you would think that I read it deeply. The reality is, I read the first chapter in a pool. so it's very like
Oh yeah,
water damage, so it looks worn.
yeah.
But let me tell you, baby, after I read that first sentence, I said, not today, Tony. But she's like, I think the first sentence is like, are you sure, sweetheart, that you want to be well?
Right. Yeah. It's like time out, time out. What do you mean
That's
by that? What do
that's
you
a
mean by that?
that's a technical foul. Like, no, thank you.
Yeah, you got to be in the right. It took me a while to even, because Tony K. Bombara is doing so much. She's doing numerology. She's doing spiritual. She's doing so much that it's a lot. So no shame at all.
So I'll hold that. But then you included a quotation from the book in your book where you start the chapter. You say, or you quote Tony saying, "It might not feel better to be well." And so I want to know from you, like, why this quote and what did you hope that it could set up for readers?
Um, well, two things, right? Um, I think wellness or being better, um, we kind of have to filter through a Eurocentric capitalist lens into what exactly that means
That part.
before we celebrate that, right? And then also, I think the path sometimes to being better or being well is not it's not a it's gonna sometimes it scars, right?
Mm,
Sometimes getting through grief or getting through a sickness irrevocably changes something about you, can scar you, can damage you, can again just rearrange who you are as a person, as a being. Um, so sometimes that path to the other side, um, it's a tough one, and it's not
mm,
going to be easy, and it's not going to be flowers and roses, and it might deeply change you. It might deeply, you know, I keep saying scar, but that's literally, what I imagine. Even if you think about it, just like on a physical
mm-hmm,
health level, um,
mm-hmm.
you have surgery, it leaves a scar, it leaves,
Scars.
So I think those two things. It's questioning what well and better is in sort of our capitalist society, and then also acknowledging that perhaps the other side of that, it can damage you, it can change you.
Yeah.
um I think that's where I'm at.
That's very real. I can see the themes of that throughout the book. You use the word scar often as almost like an entry point, like a scar is a portal,
Yeah.
or a scar is that line between, death and life. And I think thinking about scar this way physically and in terms of health and wellness is him. I mean, we've talked about this. Like, I'm literally thinking about the actual scars on my body from surgery
Right.
and just like the scars of my own personhood as
Mm.
a result of all the different levels of grief, and violence that you're talking about. I just like I appreciate your work so much because I feel like even in this conversation, I'm experiencing the book in new ways. Like, which is to say, I'm experiencing myself and my understanding of myself in the world in new ways every time we're revisiting these kind of themes and the way that they're evidenced throughout the text. So it's getting me right now.
Listen.
um to As we close, I know that Kizzy Layman, one of our greatest of all time and truly one of
Goat,
our greatest living writers.
goat. Yeah.
Truly a goat, a mentor of yours. What's something that you've learned from Kiese as the
Mm,
mentor, right?
mm.
That maybe is different or layered on top of what you've learned from Kiese, the writer.
Wow. I think I think I've learned well two things, and I'm gonna try and organize this. But um, I think initially was how much he gives, right? And not just like, and you could take that on a craft level,
Mm-hmm.
right? How much he gives in his work, how much, but I mean on a personal kind of level, to writers, to students, to just people around him, to people, to those in community with him, um and how that, how not to say I don't give enough, right? But like we can always give more, and it's always, you know kind of learning that line, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think as writers, as people, we kind of teeter that line a lot, um and we try to learn it where, we have to preserve some for ourselves. But sometimes, like, especially you talk about community, especially you talking about, people you love and care about, like, sometimes, you know, like I grew up, you know, we sharing Jordans, I give you the shirt off my back kind of vibe.
Mm-hmm.
So I I seen that immediately, and like my my Mississippi brother, like just, I did this over here, but like I know you from the same ilk. Um, and then another thing I'd say, um, is, and this is cliche, but just the value of being yourself and being true to yourself and being true to how you talk, what you like, what you don't like, all of
Mm-hmm.
these things, and moving with that with an intention, with unwavering sort of, um, with a unwavering attitude of this is who I am, this is what I want to be, you know, and I think he does a great job of just, you know, this is like what I aim to be, just beyond all the incredible things that he's done, but just like as a person
Mm-hmm.
who lives, writes, and cares about others. Like I think he does a great job of like just kind of just
Yeah.
packaging that as like a black boy from Mississippi who likes Outkast and all,
Yeah.
So I'd say those two things.
Yeah. I think we've talked so much about community here. I'd love to end on understanding, your own writing community and what's been most impactful for you in building your writing life. I think even for me personally, when I started my book, I was like, I'm just going to sit at my desk and write, and I'm going to be done with this book in 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
Like a year and a half later. But I think what I had to learn the hard way is like, oh no, baby, that's not how this works.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're putting the words on the page. Yes, it is an isolating process, but you can't write without your people.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. And that's, I don't know if that's exclusive to, maybe the kind of writers we are, but
Mm,
but where these things, like we value these things deeply, you know, just on a personhood level, but then in our practice. Um, for me, I think like this book wouldn't exist without, you know, some of the people I get to kind of be in conversation with, or some of the people that like, again, like the, some of the most rewarding things for me is um having homies come up to me like, yo, that's, we I remember that. I remember doing that,
Mm.
you know. I remember that party, or I remember that that boulevard day that
Hmm.
from that year or whatever. I remember that deli.
Yeah.
Um this is the exact path we took to school type, I live for that. I live for um being able to talk about this book. I talk about the African slave burial ground they discovered in my neighborhood. Being able to talk about the book in the public library on that land, you know,
Mm.
and talk to, just people from down the block. I think that's my favorite part of kind of sharing this book with the world. Um, with it being, with kind of the joys of my immediate world. I think,
Yeah.
kind of, it kind of keeps me a little bit steady throughout all of this. It makes everything kind of worth it. And like, oh, okay, this is why I wanted to do this. You know, um,
Yeah.
you know,
No, I love that. It brings me, I remember this moment when I was in college. I'll never forget this. Anyone who was in this class with me will remember remember this. But a mutual friend of ours was like anxiously awaiting an acceptance letter from Georgetown. Like I would
mm,
go to the campus mailbox with her almost every day 'cause she was looking for that letter. And then when it came, we had class right after, and we're just all kind of buzzing about it. And my professor, Devarian Baldwin, he was like, "What is going? Like, why, why y'all talking so much?" And a friend of mine, he's like, "Oh, sorry. Mind you, this was not the friend who got into Georgetown."
yeah,
He goes, "Oh, we got into Georgetown. We got into Georgetown."
we, you know what? That's cute. That's, you know what I mean. That's that shit.
Yeah,
Like, this is
yeah.
why we do this. Like, because
Hmm.
when black folk win, I mean, all right, black folk win, we all win.
Yeah.
I'm starting less and less to believe this, just with like, with my mayor
All skin
and
folk and kinfolk.
all
So there
skin
is
folk.
an asterisk. There is an
There's an
asterisk here.
asterisk. There's an asterisk. But for real though, when we win,
Yeah.
when one
Yeah.
person wins, we win, and yeah, that's the perfect kind of um, example of that.
Yeah. So thank you so much for being here at the Lit Lounge. Thank you
Thank you.
for, letting us win with your wins. Cause
Wow.
I feel that every time we are out hunting,
Mm,
gets another review or another prize, another award, especially as a New Yorker, I'm like, yo, we won. We got this. And so
thank
thank
you.
you, Tyreek, for winning for us.
Thank you again for having me. This was great. Such a great combo. Certain things, yeah, some things I don't think I've talked about in that way. So thank you for this. I appreciate it.
Awesome. So for everyone watching, definitely grab your coffee, please, please. So good. It's such a meditation. It's such an invitation. So thank y'all.